An army of extras strives to fade into the background of every primary film sequence. What occurs then if those supporting actors unintentionally take center stage? These extras made million-dollar errors, from notorious mishaps on popular sets to minor mistakes that cost companies a lot of money. We'll explore some of the most memorable film extra errors that made viewers laugh and occasionally directors furious. Come along as we reveal the surprising moments that permanently altered these movies. Thanks for the spoiler, kid. North by Northwest. North by Northwest, one of Alfred Hitchcock's best thrillers, had viewers on the edge. The confrontation at the Visitors Center at Mount Rushmore is nearly as well known as the crop duster pursuit, but for all the wrong reasons. Would Eve, the film's main character, shoot Roger Thornbill, played by Cary Grant? Based on the extra child in the back, he closes his eyes in preparation for the loud blast 5 seconds before Eve fires. Hitch ought to have realized that it's important to get it right the first time when working with children. Guys, are you okay there? Everything Must Go. Don't miss the 2010 dramedy Everything Must Go, starring Will Ferrell. Ferrell does a poignant job portraying a salesperson whose personal and professional worlds are collapsing around him instead of playing a loud, annoying jerk for once. In one moment, his character runs across Laura Dern's character, Delilah, an old high school buddy. Delilah's children are munching snacks in the background as the two converse. After a single cut, they're motionless and gaze into space, where they stay for the duration of the sequence. It's genuinely unsettling and distracting. Curse you, Coach Carter! Coach Carter. Samuel L. Jackson played the tough-as-nails basketball coach for the Richmond High School varsity team in Coach Carter, based on a true story. Carter prioritizes academics over athletics, even canceling the team's major game due to his players' subpar grades. Except for one man, the rest of the school reacts with the typical teenage rage when they learn. Like a silent movie villain, this unmistakable student shakes his fist at Carter like Grandpa Simpson and says he'll regret the day we betray him. No wonder they can't shoot straight. Star Wars: A New Hope. This may be one of the most well-known extra mistakes ever. It was so famous that the film was altered retrospectively to make room for it. Thus, C-3PO and R2-D2 are located on the Death Star by stormtroopers. One of the soldiers very, very loudly smacks his head on the bottom of the blast door as they enter the room where the droids are. 27 years later, George Lucas included an absurd bonk sound effect to go with the blow while remastering the films for a special edition release. That's nearly as humorous as Jar Jar. Nearly. Ghostbusters, all right! Ghostbusters. The Ghostbusters take in the cheers of New Yorkers who have gathered to support them just before they enter Dana's apartment building on Central Park West for their last fight against Gozer. One prominent red-headed extra keeps shouting, pumping his fist, and generally acting like this is the best part of his life, offering perhaps too much support. An internet detective recently revealed his identity. Aldo Ray Estes, a makeup artist who won 4 Emmy Awards for his work on As the World Churns, played him. Say, that guy looks familiar. Breakin'. If it weren't for one thing, Breakin', a breakdancing film that could only have been produced in the 1980s, most likely wouldn't have survived. Naturally, we're talking about its follow-up, Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo, whose absurd subtitle made it a meme before we even realized that memes existed. Oh, there's another noteworthy item. A muscular jerk wearing a spandex bodysuit is showing off his moves in one of the dancing scenes. Hold on, he seems familiar. Jean-Claude Van Damme appeared as an uncredited extra in one of his earliest film performances. Unintentional indecent exposure. Teen Wolf. The classic teen comedy of the 1980s is Teen Wolf. Werewolves? Verify. Drama in high school? Verify. Michael J. Fox? Continue to check. When Fox's mild-mannered Scott discovers he's a werewolf, he becomes a basketball star and starts a merchandise empire. It was the 1980s, you know. Everyone cheers after Scott's team wins a crucial basketball game near the film's end. However, one extra's celebration was a bit too wild since when she exited the bleachers, her pants were undone. She tries desperately, and mainly in vain, to zip them back up throughout the sequence. The creepiest kid ever captured on film, Back to the Future Part 3. Part 3 of Back to the Future strongly desired to be a Western. Naturally, the outcome was a solid meh. We were eager for the film to end by the time Doc Brown got a time-traveling train. Regretfully, it would give us one final consideration. Vern, Doc's youngest son, points at Marty's lower body after making a hand signal to approach him when Doc introduces him to his children. The fact that they retained it in the film is more strange than that the child couldn't wait until the conclusion of the take to use the restroom. Don't look at it. Don't look at it. Nailed it! Goodfellas. The whole purpose of an extra is to disappear into the background. Extras are set dressing that moves for the film's sake, not actual people. They should never divert attention from the stars themselves, no matter what they do. That isn't necessarily how things operate. The characters, played by Ray Liotta and Robert De Niro, engage in a dramatic psychological standoff at a diner in Goodfellas. The man behind De Niro, who is instructed not to look at the camera and makes every effort to avoid doing so, only somewhat detracts from it. He's only occasionally successful. Forget the kids, someone save the ice cream. Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. Star Wars is absurd. Please understand that we adore the films, but it's a little excessive to be so fixated on everything. Cloud City's being evacuated during an Empire attack in The Empire Strikes Back. One guy is legging it while carrying what can only be described as an interstellar ice cream maker. He received an action figure with a storyline despite only having a half second of screen time. It appears that he was carrying the memory core of his computer, which held crucial Rebel data. Or, he looted the craft services table as an extra with the 70s. That first step is a doozy. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Nothing compares to the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which starred Gene Wilder as the candy tycoon, even though Tim Burton used his permanent retainer to get Johnny Depp to play Willy Wonka. In addition to causing generations of kids to be traumatized by that tunnel scene, the film included the hit song The Candyman. Speaking of hits, the eerie candy store employee smacks a young girl on the chin as he raises the hatch to allow the children to raid his establishment like savages. She dismisses it without hesitation and rushes toward early-onset diabetes. Just fighting in World War II, no big deal. Dunkirk. One bad apple can ruin the whole bunch, as the saying goes. The cast of Christopher Nolan's epic World War II film, Dunkirk, was spoiled before the film was released. Nolan skillfully created a teaser that increased tension while showing little real action. If but for one more, it would have succeeded. In a scenario with Allied soldiers aboard a boat, everybody hears the sound of a German jet approaching. Unfortunately, an extra who can't stop grinning somewhat undermines the apparent tension. Since it was so awful, his visage was digitally changed for the DVD release. She'll be fine. 10 Things I Hate About You. You may recall 10 Things I Hate About You as the contemporary adaptation of Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew, or as the film that initially made viewers aware of Heath Ledger's fame. But for us, it will always be the scene in which a student is instructed to get assistance from her coach after an arrow hits her. Instead of running to the end of the field, she stops in the middle and turns to face the camera. We like her casual laziness, but she was never out of frame. A sweep is as lucky can be. Quantum of Solace. James Bond's 22nd film, Quantum of Solace, was a film. According to the plot, 007 battles a villainous green technology inventor named, Dominic Green. That isn't possible. In any case, Bond rides a motorcycle on a dock in one scene. The rest of us, looking at the extra on the right, sweeping a good foot off the ground while he checked his phone. What do we suppose? The microphone picked up his sweeping, so they urged him to stop. Nevertheless, he left no air molecule unswept since he was determined to give his Oscar-nominated performance. A trialogue between me, myself, and I, the room. It would be like pouring a glass with ocean water and declaring it the saltiest thing in the Atlantic to single out a poor performance in the room. Tommy Wiseau's masterpiece, which inspired James Franco's The Disaster Artist, is a film that must be seen to be believed. Let's go on without even attempting to explain the plot as it stands. One woman stands out in a party scene, infamous for many things. She's having a lively conversation, even though no one's present to listen to her. Hello, Al Aragorn. You're so crazy. The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. You could have noticed something distracting and downright strange about Aragorn's crowning if you weren't unintentionally leaving the theater during one of the 37 false endings in The Return of the King. Arwen is introduced to Aragorn as his queen shortly after she's anointed King of Gondor. A guard behind Arwen and her father Elrond is giggling uncontrollably as they're unveiled. He seems to be laughing for no apparent reason, which makes it utterly strange. Then, as suddenly as it started, he stopped laughing and caught himself. In an otherwise poignant situation, stands out like a sore thumb. Seriously questioning his life choices, the King of Queens. We acknowledge that this may be a little dishonest, but because it's our story and one of our favorites, we're including it. Yes, Patton Oswalt played Doug's pal Spence in The King of Queens. But aren't extras background characters without dialogue? That's just what Spence was in one of the episodes as Doug celebrates his 40th birthday. Oswalt stands there for the 1-minute sequence, talking nothing and doing nothing. Oswalt wanted to check if anyone would notice, even if he says he doesn't remember why. Nobody did. A tackle so hard it made him change his race. Wildcats. It seems like the sports movie cliché, eccentric coach helps a team of misfits and underdogs win at an all-important game has been used a million times, from Hoosiers to the Mighty Ducks. Another film on that lengthy list is Wildcats, which is noteworthy solely for starring Goldie Hawn as the coach in question and for being the big-screen debut of Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes. Also, there's a scene in which number 89, a gloved African-American player, is attacked. He's white and without gloves when he wakes up. It was a success. Cat's gonna cat. You only live twice. The ancient showbiz saying, never work with children or animals, is well known. It goes that adult actors will be overshadowed by their antics. This was the case in the James Bond film You Only Live Twice, albeit for entirely different reasons. Although it is now a cliché, Bond villain Ernst Blofeld was the first to use the bad guy with a cat stereotype. While his volcano base, Hug, is exploding, he pets his cat in this film. The cat is panicking and attempting to flee as it digs its claws into Donald Pleasance's arm. He should have received an Oscar for simply not flinching. Haha! Kung Fu! Enter the Dragon. We're not sure what the correct response is when we witness a man kick another man in the head 3 times, but we suspect it's not this. One of Bruce Lee's best films, Enter the Dragon, is regarded as one of the greatest and most influential martial arts films ever made. For us, it will always be a movie in which a martial arts student thinks it's hilarious when Bruce Lee destroys a random man. The fact that he's dead center and everyone else is utterly uninterested really makes him stand out. He never liked San Francisco anyway. Star Trek Into Darkness. Star Trek Into Darkness is a type of retelling of the 1982 film Star Trek II – The Wrath of Khan, as well as a follow-up to the 2009 reboot of the Star Trek franchise. How's that unclear? The initial trailer for the film tried to create the tone before it was even released. In one frantic scene, a giant spacecraft destroyed a futuristic San Francisco. One man, wearing huge, exaggerated spectacles, was staring straight at the camera and smiling as if the devastation of his city were his birthday wish, while the other citizens were screaming out. Must have gotten a bit too excited. The Dark Knight Rises. It was a relief when Christopher Nolan took over the Batman franchise after years of Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher. We were all enthralled with the trilogy of films until Batman and Catwoman and a few thugs engaged in a rooftop brawl in The Dark Knight Rises. One henchman was about to collapse when he abruptly flew backward while no one was nearby. Because he didn't want to utilize computer-generated imagery, Nolan famously cultivated a genuine cornfield for Interstellar. He said, no one will notice, and kept it in the film. I mean, let's think about this for a second. The Dark Knight. Heath Ledger's captivating portrayal of the Joker, for which he received a well-earned but posthumous Oscar, will live on in the memory of The Dark Knight forever. If it weren't for a sequence in the press conference where Harvey Dent responds to the Gotham Police Department's legitimate worries about the Joker's rampage, the film would be ideal. It completely disrupts the story's immersion. "No more dead cops," shouts one irate officer, and the other person sitting right in front of him makes an expression that reads, "Dead cops? Which cops are dead?" Regarding that, sir, I do not know. Yeah, guess they are pretty entertained. Gladiator. For the director to complain about you months after filming, how poor must you be at your job? These Gladiator extras know the answer. The Roman soldiers and Germanic barbarians engage in combat in the opening battle scene of the film. Several extras were having a great time despite the horrific battle around them. It seems they irritated filmmaker Ridley Scott so severely that he specifically mentioned them in his DVD commentary. Maximus asked, "Are you not entertained?" As we know, however, they shouldn't have replied, "Yeah." Maybe he's a vegetarian. Raiders of the Lost Ark. George Lucas wrote a love letter to the adventure serials of his youth in Raiders of the Lost Ark, creating a brand new, exciting story with Indiana Jones, the most awesome archaeologist in the world. Indy battles an Egyptian swordsman in arguably the film's most well-known scene. Many fans are aware that Harrison Ford shot him because he was unable to confront a physical altercation with him, as the script required, due to his dysentery at the time. Most people are unaware that the butcher behind Indy throughout the sequence is the worst actor ever. He uses his knife so flimsily that the meat can simply get up and leave. A more extensive pro than the movie deserved, frankly. The Last Samurai. The Last Samurai tells the story of how Tom Cruise was the white man who was needed to preserve Japan. Joking aside, the film isn't entirely based on the screenwriter's ideas because throughout the 19th century, several Western soldiers assisted in modernizing Japanese forces. Cruise's made-up United States, Nathan Algren, the Army captain, reportedly led the Japanese forces effectively. It's so fantastic that he immediately returns to formation when he gets off his horse, and the beast kicks an extra right in the family jewels. That's discipline. I've seen worse. The Day After Tomorrow. Greta Thunberg would have directed the disaster film The Day After Tomorrow. Its plot centers on a new ice age brought on by global warming and is based on a book written by two late-night radio chat show hosts who are not experts. However, this ice age appears on a strict timetable, occurring overnight rather than over a very long time. In one scene, our planet is battered by a violent storm that's never been witnessed before. Everyone runs away like ants, except for one man who does nothing except stay there. You dare! Now where did that pesky button go? Star Wars: Return of the Jedi. Let's face it, George Lucas reportedly attempted to address the first Star Wars trilogy's weighty extra issues by issuing computer-generated imagery for the full ensemble. However, there were still honest people in costumes in the originals, which resulted in some amusing scenes. Admiral Akbar is a member of the Mon Calamari, a race of men who resemble seafood. A Mon Calamari extra, who's blind, misses the button he's supposed to press by a good 6 inches in one Return of the Jedi sequence. He realizes it with a start and then moves to where it is. He's a pacifist. The Dark Knight Rises. Perhaps the harshest director since Stanley Kubrick is Christopher Nolan. He has an unmatched attention to detail in Hollywood, but we don't mean he browbeats his performers with endless takes. Given that The Dark Knight Rises has multiple multi-man battle scenarios, you may assume that he would only work with the best stuntmen and fight choreographers. The violent struggle on Wall Street involved so many individuals that extras must have replaced some stuntmen, like that man who threw a crazy haymaker at nothing. Monkey See, Monkey Do Not, Planet of the Apes. The original Planet of the Apes has become a bit of a dystopian film cliché in more than the 50 years since it was released. They were on Earth all along. Still, it's a pretty good science fiction thriller, and you can sense the uncertainty and rage that Charlton Heston's character is experiencing. The monkeys, who take pleasure in causing him pain, throw stones at him in one particular scenario. Generally speaking, they do, while the other throws the stone so limp that it almost clears her body. The first additional only looks to be afraid for her own life. Bash, 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 bashing all day. Kingsmen, the Secret Service. There are some quite outrageous situations in Kingsmen, the Secret Service, which is based on a comic book. The brawl that breaks out in a church in Kentucky is possibly the most brutally epic of them all. In a succession of one-shot takes, Harry Hart, a member of the secret intelligence organization of the same name, must repel the entire congregation. One extra makes multiple appearances in the background, swinging a chair as feebly as a dehydrated grandmother. But it's tough to pick him out amid all the chaos. That said, you're unable to look at anything else after you discover it. And Vogue. Jurassic Park. There are several adversaries in Steven Spielberg's warning about our glaring drive to resurrect dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. Naturally, there are the dinosaurs themselves, but we're hesitant to label them evil because they merely behave according to their biological needs. Next up is Newman from Seinfeld, who is also Dennis Nedry. He works only for Dodgson, employed by John Hammond's corporate rivals, even though he's blatantly evil. However, failing to close the taxi doors is his most significant transgression. However, his cabbie's response was slightly too extreme, displaying his complete contempt with a diva-like flourish. This guy ruined The Dark Knight Rises for everyone. The Dark Knight Rises. The Dark Knight Rises was a decent bookend to the Batman trilogy. However, it was not nearly as good as the first two films directed by Christopher Nolan. At least if you could look past Tom Hardy's still mysterious choice to give Bane an Irish accent and make him seem like Darth Vader. An extra who recorded the Heinz Field disaster scene on his cell phone is the cause of the commotion surrounding Bane's voice. His camera captured Hardy's garbled delivery over the loudspeakers, obviously in breach of his NDA, and caused a lot of worry on the internet. Stop Seizure Time. Die Hard 2. In a nutshell, what's the best Christmas film ever? Your response would have been untrue if it hadn't been Die Hard. We also enjoyed Die Hard 2, even though it was essentially the same film set in an airport rather than in an office building. This time, John McClane must protect his wife from terrorists at Dulles International Airport in Washington, D.C. Are Mondays correct? In any case, the evil guys create panic when they take over the airport. It's a reasonable reaction, but one guy may have gone too far by flopping on the ground like a fish out of water. 6 Degrees of Jesse Hyman. So many movies. An extra task is to blend in with the background to add some life to a scene without drawing any attention away from the real stars. Easy, isn't it? Introducing Jesse Hyman. Known as the greatest extra in the world, he starred in several films and television series. These include his roles in Transformers, American Pie 2, Old School, Spider-Man, The Social Network, and Catch Me If You Can. Michael Bay personally chose him to appear in not one but 2 Transformers films. He may be the worst extra in the world, with a distinctive appearance and an IMDb page with roughly 70 credits. Well, that's disturbing. Forrest Gump. In Forrest Gump, a local idiot finds himself in a series of complicated scenarios that put him at the center of significant events on a worldwide scale. He receives a football scholarship at the University of Alabama in one of those cases. After scoring a touchdown during a game, Forrest simply runs out of the stadium. He may be the dumbest so-and-so on the planet, but he's fast. His coach jokes. His assistant coach's unsettling, wide-mouthed smile doesn't go away throughout the scene. At last, kindly, he yelled, "Yeah!" We simply appreciated anything that caused him to alter his facial expressions. This dude has only one setting, 11, The Return of the Musketeers. Just because The Return of the Musketeers or The Treasures of Cardinal Mazarin is a Russian film or has what may be the longest title in movie history doesn't mean you should ignore it. Another thing about it is that it features one of the worst, hammiest extras that we've ever seen in a film, Russian or otherwise. We assume that the Musketeers are discussing diamonds with a queen. All of it's in Russian, so we have no idea. This black hat guy was meant to go for listening intently. Instead, he sounded more too campy even for RuPaul's Drag Race. Hey, quit stealing Data's thunder. Star Trek Generations. What if we could stress test all of William Shatner's toupees to see if they ever fall off? Is one of the bold ideas that Star Trek Generations dares to pose. Although they don't, film does. After the Enterprise successfully destroys a Klingon bird of prey, this extra, who ought never have been permitted to graduate from Starfleet Academy, appeals. One red shirt pumps a limp-wristed fist as the crew celebrates. It wouldn't have been as awful if Data hadn't immediately followed it up with an Enfuego fist pump. Red shirt, don't undercut the stars. You men constantly perish for this reason. Is that Elvis? Home Alone. Home Alone was the highest-grossing live-action comedy movie ever made in the U.S. for over 20 years. It has everything, from Joe Pesci in a children's film to a youngster creating potentially fatal traps, so that distinction was well earned. Did we mention that Elvis is in it as well? For years, there's been a story that the man circled here was the king. We apologize in advance for how foolish this is. Naturally, he isn't. Elvis is living in Barbados, far from the spotlight. But we can't help but think about that scene. We feel so bad for laughing, but we did. Titanic. The Titanic took a very long time to get to the point. James Cameron skirted the issue so much that we wanted to call the bush an ambulance for a film whose conclusion everyone in the audience already knew. However, the fun starts when that ship begins to sink. At that point, the film shifted from being about two uninteresting characters to all the inventive ways individuals can drown, in our opinion. For example, Propeller Man. He created a metallic clang as he fell off the boat, then spun into the sea like Sonic the Hedgehog. That was played for laughs. Yeah, you're pronouncing that right. Batman Begins. For Batman Begins, we're here. Before Tom Hardy's Darth Vader wearing a jockstrap performance spoils Christopher Nolan's Bat trilogy, it establishes the tone for everything that follows. In any case, Batman Begins demonstrates how Ra's al Ghul trained Bruce Wayne. After throwing a party for himself back in Gotham, Bruce is confronted by a socialite who wants to introduce him to Ra's al Ghul. First, didn't she think it was odd that Bruce claimed to have seen Ra's death? Why did the phony Ra and the socialite leave without saying anything, although the film continues without them? Okay, settle down, random citizen. RoboCop II. RoboCop 2 eliminated all that cerebral material and only included the excessive, over-the-top violence. While RoboCop concealed a fairly scathing critique of consumer culture. That's not fair, though. One scenario got us thinking. How did no one tell that guy to relax? The audience shouts down the man in the first picture after he attempts to interrupt a press conference. The extra in the last picture continues to work long after everyone else has quit, seemingly mortified that anyone would dare to do so. Really aiming to live out that title, huh? Almost Famous. Actress Frances McDormand has won Tony, Emmy, and Oscar awards. You cannot look at anyone else when she's on the screen. That is, excluding that particular sequence from Almost Famous. Elaine, the mother of the film's protagonist, is portrayed by McDormand. She goes to his graduation in one moment, even though he isn't present. It would have been a brief but intense moment without the extra over her shoulder faking it up. She did precisely what extras shouldn't do, according to director Cameron Crowe, who singled her out in the DVD commentary. Maybe acting just isn't for you, man. Animal House. In addition to being John Belushi's breakthrough film following his Saturday Night Live success, Animal House sets the stage for several obscene college comedies and had a sequence in which a man appeared to be possessed. The scenario in question is supposedly about the wormy Dean Wormer being honored as the Grand Marshal of a parade and given a gold-plated whistle. We don't know whether the excessive twitching is due to a medical problem or something else. But in any event, perhaps a job that requires him to blend in with the background isn't for him. Independence is overrated. Really? Braveheart. What if Frozen is more realistic than Braveheart? It is the film that made Mel Gibson famous as a serious actor before we all decided to act like he didn't exist anymore. In any event, the movie of William Wallace and his struggle to liberate Scotland from the nasty English is good. Doesn't work, spoiler alert. The acting of the extras is considerably less effective. For instance, these two are meant to be engaged in mortal conflict, which will decide who will rule this territory. Instead of being epic, it's just two indifferent men clumsily clanging rubber swords together before giving up. Great effort, guys! Hannibal, Rome's Worst Nightmare. Since Hannibal, Rome's Worst Nightmare is a television film never released in theaters, it is admittedly cheating. Nevertheless, a film is a film, and that's important. Problem with sword and sandals movies is that they nearly always have massive combat with many extras, and as long as you don't look too carefully, they all appear unique and thrilling. Hannibal is the exception to that rule because it's awful, even if you don't look closely. We wish Rome returned simply so it might fall again, from the men in the plaid on the left to all the extras fighting like kids during recess. If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon